I was 36 years old the night I made 3 phone calls in 11 minutes and quietly ended a decade of being my family's safety net. But this story really starts almost 9 years before that, with a food truck and a $500 favor I never once wrote down. My name is Noelle Ferris. I run food and beverage operations for a hotel group across 6 properties. I spend my working days reading contracts other people don't want to read, and catching the one number that's about to go wrong before it actually does. Last month, my younger brother Beau asked me to guarantee a 5-year commercial lease so he could finally open a real restaurant, and when I asked, reasonably, to see his actual numbers first, my mother said it to me the way you'd correct a child who'd forgotten her manners at the table. Family doesn't audit family, Noelle. I didn't argue with her. Not that night. What none of them knew was that I'd already spent a quiet week finding out exactly how many of Beau's debts still had my name attached to them. From favors so old, most of my family had genuinely forgotten I was ever asked. And what none of them knew yet was that I could take my name back off every single one of them, the same patient way I'd once put it on. 11 days later, a landlord's office would get a phone call at 11 at night that changed his whole weekend. 4 months after that, my 12-year-old nephew would ask me to teach him the one thing his own father still doesn't know how to do. And nobody in my family ever saw any of it coming from steady, reliable Noelle, the one who always just quietly took care of it. Welcome back to Calm Stories, where the ones who always picked up the check finally tell you the whole thing, calmly, start to finish. If a quiet kind of justice is your thing, settle in. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit subscribe so you don't miss exactly how this one ends. Let me back up. Amberline is the kind of small city where 3 generations of the same families still show up to the same Friday fish fry, where everybody's cousin works at the plant or the hospital or, in our case, ran a diner on Route 9 for 40 years. I grew up the older sister in a house there, where money was tight and love was loud, which sounds like a contradiction until you've actually lived inside one. My father, Gordon, drove a delivery route for a beverage distributor for 26 years, home late, tired, in a specific way that made the whole house go quiet around him. His own father had lost a small hardware store to a bad year and a worse loan back when Gordon was a teenager, and he'd grown up watching a proud man go quiet in a different, harder way after that. Which I think is the entire reason my father has spent his own adult life believing that showing up for family, financially, without question, without ever once being the one who says no, is the only version of love he actually trusts. My mother, Ellen, kept the peace the way some people keep a garden, constantly, carefully, pulling out anything that looked like it might grow into a real argument before it had the chance. And my grandmother, June, ran a 6-stool diner on Route 9 for 4 decades before I was even born. The kind of place where the coffee was bad and the pie was extraordinary and every regular got called by name. Grandma June died when I was 19, and she left behind exactly 2 things that mattered to this family. A shoebox of handwritten recipe cards in her sharp, slanted hand, and a wooden cooking spoon, the handle worn pale and smooth from 40 years of her grip, with a small J burned into the base of it by my grandfather the year they opened the place. I kept the spoon. I don't entirely know why. Out of everything in that diner, it was the spoon I asked for. It's ridden in the bottom of my bag through 4 apartments and 2 promotions, and there are nights, more of them than I'd like to admit, when I've reached into my bag for a pen and closed my hand around that worn wooden handle instead and felt steadier for it. I have one particular memory of Grandma June from when I was maybe 8, small enough to still be sitting up on the diner counter on a slow Tuesday afternoon, swinging my sneakers against the cabinet below while she restocked napkin dispensers. A regular named Cecil had come in short on cash for his coffee and eggs, embarrassed in the specific way proud old men get embarrassed, patting his pockets like the money might still turn up if he checked one more time. Grandma June waved it off without even looking up from the napkins. "Get it next time, Cecil," she said, easy as anything, and he did, every single time, for years, because she'd made it possible for him to still be a man who paid his tab instead of a man who couldn't. I asked her afterward why she never wrote it down anywhere. She looked at me for a second like she was deciding how much truth an 8-year-old could actually carry. And then she told me the books had 2 kinds of debt in them: the kind you wrote down because you genuinely needed it back, and the kind you let go because writing it down would have cost the other person more than the money was ever worth. I didn't understand the difference yet. I would spend the next 28 years slowly, expensively, learning it for myself. I got a job in hospitality the summer after college, almost by accident, folding napkins at a wedding venue for $9 an hour, and something about the industry just fit the shape of me. I understood contracts the way some people understand music. I could read a banquet order and see, 3 lines down, the clause that was going to cost somebody $11,000 if nobody caught it first. By the time I was 36, I was overseeing food and beverage across 6 properties for a regional hotel group, a real title, a real salary, the kind of stability nobody in my family had ever quite managed to hold on to for long. My brother Beau is 4 years younger than me, warmer than me, funnier than me, the kind of person a room naturally turns toward. He started a food truck when he was 26, Grandma June's Kitchen on Wheels, painted the same faded yellow as her old diner sign, and for a while it was a genuinely lovely thing to watch. Him standing at a window on a Friday night, handing somebody a plate of her chicken and dumplings like he was handing them something sacred, because in a way he was. You have to understand how a decade of this gets built, because nobody hands you a bill for 10 years all at once. It arrives just this once at a time. The first one I actually remember was an equipment loan when the truck's first fryer died 2 years in, $4,000, and Beau couldn't qualify a loan, so I co-signed, quietly, at a bank branch on my lunch hour, and told myself it was a one-time thing. Then it was a sublease on a shared commissary kitchen the health department required him to use. My name on it because his credit still hadn't recovered from the fryer loan. Then a second, bigger equipment loan for a proper smoker. Then a vehicle loan when the original truck's transmission finally gave out for good. Each one arrived the same way: urgent, small enough in the moment to feel petty to refuse. Wrapped in some version of the sentence, "You're the only one of us who can actually get approved for anything, Noelle." And I was. I always was. I never sat down and decided to become my family's credit score. It just happened, the way water finds the lowest point in a room, one reasonable favor at a time, until I looked up 9 years later and honestly couldn't have told you, if you'd asked me cold, exactly how many things still had my name quietly attached to the bottom of them. I want to be honest with you about why I kept saying yes, because I think some of you already know the shape of this feeling. Being the reliable one felt, for a long time, like being loved. I grew up watching my parents worry themselves gray over Beau, in a way they never quite worried about me. Not because they loved him more, I don't actually believe that, but because he needed worrying about, and I had made myself, very early, and very thoroughly, into someone who didn't. Nobody checks on the person who never seems to need checking on. They just check whether she's available. So I made myself available, for 9 years. And some tired, honest part of me kept doing it, because as long as I was the one holding everything steady, I never had to find out whether this family would still want me around, if I ever once put it down. Beau brought the ask to a Sunday dinner in March, at my parents' house, the same table I'd been eating at since I was 7. He'd found a real storefront finally, a genuine brick-and-mortar space, 2 blocks off Amberline's main square. Exactly the kind of place he'd always said Grandma June's food deserved. The landlord wanted a 5-year lease, personally guaranteed, plus a build-out loan for the kitchen fit-out, and Beau's own credit, still recovering from the truck years, wasn't going to qualify him alone for either one. He looked at me across a bowl of my mother's potatoes and asked, gently, like it was the easiest question in the world, if I'd guarantee both. "This is the one, Noelle," he said. And I could see he meant it, his whole face open in the way it used to get as a kid, right before Christmas. Grandma June's name on an actual storefront window. I told him, just as gently, that I'd love to help him think it all the way through, but that before I put my name on anything that size, I needed to actually see the numbers first, The truck's real revenue, the existing debt, the margins, the whole honest picture, the same way I'd want to see it for any deal at work. It was, I want you to know, the single most reasonable request I have ever made of anyone in my life. My mother set her fork down. Family doesn't audit family, Noelle, she said, and there was a soft, injured note folded under it, the kind that's harder to argue with than actual anger ever is. You'd do this for a stranger at the hotel and call it due diligence, I said, quietly. I'm asking to do it for my own brother. My mother's mouth went thin. That's exactly the problem, she said. He's not a hotel account. I looked at my father, waiting. He didn't say anything at all, which in that house had always meant he agreed with her completely. I didn't put up a fight that night. I finished my dinner. I told them I needed a little time, and I drove home with both hands steady on the wheel and a very old, very familiar weight settling back into my chest, the specific weight of being asked, once again, to prove I was still willing to be useful. If you've ever been the reliable one in a family that only ever seems to notice you when they need something, I want you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment and just let me know you're out there, because the part where this actually starts to turn is coming, and I don't want you to miss it. Hit subscribe so it finds you. My nephew Milo found me on my parents' back porch about an hour later, while I was supposedly getting air. He's 12, all elbows and quiet watchfulness, the kind of kid who notices everything and says almost none of it out loud. He sat down next to me on the cold step without being asked, and, after a while, said, not looking at me, that I didn't have to do it. I asked him what he meant. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. The restaurant. He said his dad didn't actually need the big storefront, that Bo had told him once, just the two of them, that the truck was doing fine, that it was actually Grandma Ellen who kept bringing up the real restaurant at every single dinner, who'd started telling her book club about it before Bo had even found the space. It's not really about the food, Milo said, flatly. The way you say a thing you've known for a while and finally stopped hoping wasn't true. My 12-year-old nephew had understood, in about a season, something that had taken me 9 years and a bottom-of-the-bag wooden spoon to even begin circling. I put my arm around him and he let me, which he almost never does anymore, and sitting on those cold steps, I made a different decision than the one I'd driven out there with. I wasn't going to protect the restaurant dream. I was going to figure out what was actually true. A few days later, my mother asked me to drive out to the storage unit behind my parents' house and pull anything with Grandma June's name on it, in case it was useful for the restaurant's branding somehow. I went alone on a Saturday morning, mostly glad of an excuse to be somewhere quiet. Behind 2 collapsed patio umbrellas and a box of old Christmas lights, I found 3 of her cash ledgers from the diner, covers gone soft with age, and I sat down right there on the concrete floor and read one cover to cover, the way you'd read a letter from someone you missed. Most of it was ordinary. Coffee, pie, the price of flour climbing a nickel at a time across a decade. But scattered through the pages, in the same sharp, slanted hand as her recipe cards, were dozens of small notations that weren't sales at all. Owed, forgiven. Owed, forgiven. Beside names I half remembered from childhood. A nephew, 2 regulars, at least once my own father's name, from years before I was even born. She had spent 40 years quietly deciding, one plate at a time, who genuinely needed the debt let go, and who just needed to be trusted to eventually pay it back. And as far as I could find across all 3 ledgers, she'd never once gotten it so wrong that it cost her the diner. I sat on that concrete floor a long time. I didn't yet know exactly what I was going to do about Bo's guarantee. But I understood, reading my own grandmother's handwriting, that the woman this whole family claimed to be honoring with a storefront had actually been the most careful bookkeeper any of us ever had, and that somewhere along the way, everyone but me seemed to have quietly forgotten that part of her on purpose. The turn, if I'm honest, started with a mistake of my own, the kind I want to tell you about because I don't think you should hear a story like this and believe I got everything right the first time. 2 days after that Sunday dinner, my mother called, warm and easy. and said that all she was really asking was for me to just look over Beau's paperwork so I'd understand it properly before deciding anything. Reasonable enough on its face. I said yes. What I didn't fully register in the moment was that by that Friday, my mother had already told her sister, who had already told 2 cousins, that Aunt Noelle was helping make the restaurant happen, a sentence that traveled through my family faster than anything true ever seems to. I found out when a cousin texted me congratulations on the new place, followed an hour later by a second cousin asking if the family was doing a group gift for the opening, followed that same evening by my aunt posting, in the extended family group chat I mostly mute, a photo of Grandma June's old diner sign with 3 heart emojis and the caption, "Coming back to Amberline, thanks to Noelle." I hadn't agreed to anything except reading a folder. I want you to sit with that for a second, the way I've had to. I gave them 1 inch of consent, offhand, over the phone, and by the end of the week the whole family had built a house on top of it. I did not correct the cousin's text right away. I have learned, over 9 years of being handed conclusions I never actually agreed to, that correcting the story in the moment rarely changes it. It only marks you as the difficult one. So I let it sit, and I went and got the folder from Beau myself, in person, at the truck, on a slow Tuesday afternoon with the fryer humming behind him. He handed it over almost proudly, like a report card he was sure had come back good. "This is everything," he said. "Landlord's terms, the build-out estimate, last 2 years of the truck's receipts." I told him I'd go through it properly and get back to him within the week, and he grinned and said, "Take your time, Noe. I'm not worried. You'll see it's solid." There was something in the easy certainty of that sentence that stayed with me the whole drive home, because I don't think he was lying to me. I think he genuinely believed it. The specific, hopeful kind of belief a person builds when looking closely has always felt more dangerous than not looking at all. Here is the part of this I still think about most. Beau is not a con artist. I want to be completely clear about that before I tell you what I found, because he isn't, and treating him like one would be its own kind of lie. He is a genuinely talented cook, running a genuinely exhausting small business on thin margins, the way most small food businesses actually run, and he had never once sat down and looked at the whole picture himself, because looking felt, to him, like admitting he might be failing at the one thing he'd built his whole identity around since Grandma June died. The truck's real numbers were fine, not thriving, but fine, enough to support itself and slowly pay down what was left of the equipment loans. The proposed restaurant, on the other hand, the storefront, the 5-year lease, the build-out loan, the whole thing my mother had already announced to her book club, would roughly triple his fixed monthly costs against revenue projections that were, generously, optimistic. I've read enough restaurant business plans in my career to know optimistic when I see it dressed up in a spreadsheet. I called a friend from business school, Priscilla Loomis, who practices small business and contract law now, and asked her, informally, over coffee, what a personal guarantor's actual exposure looked like on a deal shaped like this one. She walked me through it slowly, the way you'd explain a fire escape to someone who'd never needed to use one. A personal guarantee on a 5-year commercial lease doesn't expire when the business struggles. It follows you, personally, for the life of the lease. Landlord's recourse against your own assets, if the tenant defaults, no different, practically speaking, from co-signing a mortgage on a house you'll never live in. I asked her the question I'd actually driven there to ask. Would a lender ever bundle old, smaller guarantees into a new, larger one, just to simplify their own paperwork? All the time, she said, especially once a family member's got more than one existing obligation sitting with the same lender. It's cheaper for the bank to manage one file than 4. I asked what that would mean for me specifically, if it happened before I'd made a decision. She set down her cup. It would mean the 2 old guarantees stop being separate, cancelable things, and become one piece of a 5-year instrument you'd need everyone's cooperation to ever unwind again, she said. If you have any intention of stepping back from any part of this, Noelle, the only leverage you have is doing it before that paperwork closes. After, you're just another name on one bigger file. I asked her, quietly, whether that made me a bad person for even considering it. She looked at me for a second, the way Grandma June used to look at me, deciding how much truth I could carry, and said that in her experience, the people who asked that question were almost never the ones who actually were one. I thanked her and drove home and sat in my own kitchen for a long time before I let myself do the next thing. I want to tell you about the number, because I think some of you have your own version of it sitting in a drawer somewhere, unopened. I took out my laptop at nearly midnight, and I built a spreadsheet, the way I build one for a hotel property that's bleeding money nobody's noticed yet. Column 1, the date. Column 2, what it was for. Column 3, the amount. Column 4, paid back. I started with the Friar loan, 8 years and some months back, $4,000, and I worked forward, refusing to round anything, refusing to soften a single figure. The commissary sublease, the smoker loan, the vehicle loan, a dozen smaller things in between, an insurance gap here, a permit fee there, each one small, each one wrapped in the same urgent, reasonable kindness, each one quietly closing my own folder a little tighter without my ever noticing the door swing shut. Column 4 stayed almost entirely empty the whole way down. When I finally let myself scroll to the bottom and look at the total, it was $31,400, over 9 years, not 1 cent of it in column 4. I have learned that crying is a feeling, and that night I needed the figure more than I needed the feeling, so I set the feeling in one chair and pulled the figure into the other and looked straight at it until the shaking in my hands settled. There was a second thing the spreadsheet showed me, and it's the thing that turned this from a grief into an actual plan. Building it forced me to go back through the original loan and lease documents to get the numbers exactly right, and that's when I saw, in black and white, that I was not simply the wallet everyone assumed I was. On the commissary sublease and the original equipment loan, both still active, both still unpaid down to zero, I wasn't just a cosigner. I was listed as an authorized guarantor, with standing rights to request release or refinancing review, the same rights any bank grants any personal guarantor, rights nobody in my family had ever once mentioned to me, because I suspect nobody in my family had ever actually read the documents I'd signed either. For 9 years I had felt like a wallet, passive, opened whenever anyone reached for it. A wallet has no power at all. A guarantor does. And a guarantee you gave without ever thinking it through is a guarantee you are entirely allowed to think through again. Before I did anything at all with that, I gave my family a door, because I need you to know I offered them a real conversation before I ever touched a lock. I sent Bo a message, warm, specific, the kind I'd send a client whose numbers didn't add up yet, but still deserved a real plan. I told him I loved him and I loved this restaurant dream, and that I wanted to build an honest, smaller, real version of it with him, on paper, together, something we could actually both afford without either of us pretending. I offered a set number, out in the open, not a discount, not a favor, a real contribution I'd name out loud, instead of quietly absorbing later. He didn't answer that night. My mother did, calling instead of texting, her voice doing the thing it does when she wants me to hear it break. "So that's it," she said. "We negotiate with you now like you're the bank." I told her that wasn't what I'd offered. I'd offered to build something real, together, on the record instead of in the dark. "Real families don't keep score, Noelle," she said, and I understood, hearing it, that to her a number written down in the open wasn't honesty. It was an accusation. If you've ever known exactly how a story like this ends weeks before the rest of your family did, and had to sit with that knowledge quietly, waiting for the right moment to actually use it, stay with me. The part where I finally decide what to do with everything I'd found is coming, and I promise you it's worth the wait. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. The landlord's office called it a courtesy update. Bo's build-out loan, which was contingent on the lease being fully guaranteed and signed by that Friday, was being processed by the same regional lender who already held the commissary sublease and the old equipment loan, and their paperwork included a standard consolidation clause, rolling all of Bo's existing obligations, including the ones with my name still on them, into one single 5-year guarantee once the new lease closed. Priscilla had been right down to the letter. If that Friday's signing went through, unwinding any single piece of my 9 years of favors afterward would require everyone's cooperation. Cooperation I had no reason left to expect from a family that had just called an honest number an accusation. I ran one small test before I let myself decide anything for certain. The kind of quiet check I run at work when I want to see how a shaky account actually behaves under a little real pressure. At the next family dinner, my mother had already set an extra place at the table for no occasion I could identify, and I understood, sitting down, that some version of a celebration was quietly being assumed into existence around me before I'd said yes to anything. When she asked whether I'd thought more about the number, I said, evenly, that I needed a few more days. I watched the warmth in that kitchen cool by a solid 10 degrees in under a minute. My father, who almost never speaks first, said, gently, in the voice he uses to end things rather than start them, that I'd always been the one who could carry more than the rest of them, and that being able to wasn't really a choice a person got to make once the family actually needed her to. Family isn't about whether you want to, he said, it's about whether you can. I didn't answer him that night. I have thought about that sentence more times since than I can count, because it was, I finally understood, the truest and cruelest thing anyone in my family had ever said to me, delivered so gently it almost sounded like love. I have found, in 9 years of reading contracts for a living, that the people most certain a favor will never be called in are usually the same people who have never once had to be the one calling it in themselves. I did the math one final time, alone, the night before the Friday deadline, with Grandma June's spoon on the table beside the laptop, the way some people keep a photograph nearby for a hard conversation. If I let the paperwork close as scheduled, I would be guaranteeing a restaurant I already knew, professionally, was underfinanced against its own projections, and I would be doing it with a rollover clause that would make walking any of it back, ever, almost impossible. If I acted before that Friday closing instead, I could formally request release from the 2 old, still active guarantees, using rights that had been mine the entire time and that nobody had ever bothered to tell me about, and I could do it without owing anyone a courtroom, a confrontation, or a single raised voice. The clock wasn't a metaphor, it was an actual clock. Once that Friday's paperwork was filed, the choice would no longer be mine to make at all. I sat at my kitchen table for a long while before I picked up the phone, running everything one more time, less because I doubted the numbers, and more because some part of me needed my hands to stay busy, while the rest of me caught up to what I already knew I was about to do. The house was quiet in the particular way a house gets right before you do something you can't undo. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear, faintly, a neighbor's dog somewhere down the block. I thought about Grandma June's ledger, owed, forgiven, owed, forgiven. 40 years of a woman deciding, plate by plate, exactly where her own generosity should actually end, and never once losing the diner over it. I thought about Milo on the porch steps, 12 years old and already seeing more clearly than I had at 36. I picked up the phone. At 11 o'clock that night, I made the first call. The commissary kitchen's leasing office had an after-hours line, and a tired-sounding man named Warren answered on the 4th ring. I gave him the account number, my name, and the sentence I'd been quietly walking toward for 9 years. I'd like to formally request release as guarantor on this sublease, effective immediately, per the original agreement's terms. He asked if I understood that would leave the current tenant, my brother's business, needing to requalify independently to keep the space. I said I did. He processed it in under 4 minutes and told me I'd receive written confirmation by morning. I called the equipment lender's line next and did the same thing, my hand steady in a way that honestly surprised me, given how hard my heart was working underneath it. Then I called the number on the new build-out loan paperwork, the one tied to Friday's closing, and told the loan officer, plainly, that I would not be signing as guarantor on the new consolidated agreement, and asked her to note, formally, on the file, that my name should not appear anywhere on Friday's paperwork in any capacity. 3 calls, 11 minutes total. 9 years of a certain version of me ended in less time than it takes to run a load of dishes. I did one more thing before I let myself sleep, and it was the calmest, kindest, and hardest thing I have ever typed. I opened the family group chat, the same one that had congratulated me on a restaurant I'd never agreed to, and I wrote a single, level message. I told them I had released myself, that night, from the 2 existing guarantees still in my name, and that I would not be signing the new one either. I told them I loved Bo, and I loved Milo, and I was not going to explain the rest of it over text. I said I'd be at my parents' table at 7 the next morning, and if anyone wanted to talk about any of it, that's exactly where I would be. Then, I printed the spreadsheet. All 9 years of it. $31,400, column 4 empty the entire way down. I set the pages by my keys, next to Grandma June's spoon, so I wouldn't forget either one in the morning, though there was no real chance I would have. I got to my parents' house a little before 7 because I have never once been late to anything in my life, and I sat in the driveway for a minute with the engine off, watching the kitchen light come on the way it always did. Bo's truck was already in the driveway. Of course it was. I picked up the folder and the spoon, which I'd brought without fully deciding to, and I walked in just as his phone lit up on the counter, screen up, and I watched all 4 of us read it at the same moment. An email. Subject line, Guarantor release confirmed. Timestamp, 6:58. Bo grabbed the phone. "What is this?" he said, not really a question, and then, quieter, "It says you released yourself. Both of them, last night." My mother froze at the stove with a spatula in her hand. My father looked up slowly from his coffee. "Noelle," he said, "what did you do?" I set my keys down. I set the folder on the table, unopened, squared to the edge, the way I square everything, and I told them, in the calmest voice I own, that I had released myself from the 2 old guarantees the night before, and that I would not be signing the new one either, and that I was sorry for the timing, but that the timing had never actually been mine to control. The kitchen came apart around me the way I'd known it would. Bo said I'd waited until the last possible second on purpose, to humiliate him, to make sure the whole restaurant collapsed in the most public way I could manage. My mother said my name like a plea. "Honey, we can still fix this. We can call them back this morning." And that word, fix, in my mother's mouth, after 9 years, was the last small push I needed, because I understood exactly who fix had always meant. It had always meant me. Bo was still staring at his phone, like it might change what it said if he looked at it long enough. "You could have just told me privately," he said, quieter now, some of the fury draining into something closer to hurt. "I could have," I agreed. I almost did, 3 separate times this week. "But privately has been how this family has always done it, Bo, and privately is exactly how I ended up $31,000 into something nobody else in this kitchen even knew existed until this morning. I wanted it on the record, for once, where nobody could quietly revise it later." I did not raise my voice. I have almost never raised my voice in that house, and I wasn't going to start on the one morning I'd finally stopped being afraid of the silence that follows it. I let the noise run all the way out, until Bo was breathing hard, and my mother had one hand pressed flat against her own chest, and my father had gone very quiet in the particular way he goes quiet right before he says something he actually means. Then, I put 2 fingers on the folder and slid it to the center of the table. "Before anyone talks about fixing anything," I said, "I want everyone to see exactly what we've all been fixing for 9 years. I opened it myself, since nobody reached for it, and turned it so the numbers faced them right side up. $31,400. 9 years, 1 empty column the entire way down. I could have closed that folder right there. I felt both roads the second I laid the pages down, the same way I imagine you feel standing at the top of a set of stairs you've climbed 100 times before. I could have said I'd overreacted, that I'd call the lender back within the hour, that we'd forget this whole morning ever happened, and the relief in that kitchen would have arrived instantly, and I'd have kept my chair at that table exactly as it had always been. I didn't take that road. I looked at my brother instead, at his wrecked, furious face, and I told him the truest thing I know. Bo, I paid for almost all of it, quietly, for 9 years, and I'm not showing you these pages to hurt you. I'm showing you because I love you too much to keep doing this in the dark. And I'm not stepping back because I stopped believing in the restaurant, I told him. I'm stepping back because for the first time in 9 years, I actually looked at it honestly, and I think you deserve a version of this dream that doesn't need me quietly bleeding to keep it standing. My father made a small sound, like he wanted to speak, and didn't. Milo, who'd come down the stairs partway through all of it, stood in the doorway, with his eyes filling, and I did not take a single word of it back, because the not taking it back was the actual decision, not the phone calls. The weeks after were quieter than I expected, and lonelier, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. My mother didn't call for almost a month, and when she finally did, it was about something else entirely, and neither of us mentioned that kitchen table, which is about as close to a truce as my family knows how to offer. The same aunt who'd posted the diner sign with 3 hearts posted nothing at all when the storefront lease quietly fell through, and I noticed the silence more than I ever would have noticed an explanation. I let it stay quiet. Some corrections aren't worth making out loud, and I've stopped needing every version of this story to be the one that gets told at Thanksgiving. My father, in his own slow way, started leaving me a single line in his weekly texts. Nothing about the money, just a fact about his day, which from him is its own kind of apology. Bo didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When he finally did, it was to tell me, stiffly, that he'd walked away from the storefront lease entirely and had instead put down a much smaller deposit on a shared commissary slot with proper cold storage, twice the truck's current capacity, financed on his own, in his own name, at his own pace. It is, everyone who's tried it agrees, considerably better chicken and dumplings than the food truck ever managed on its own. And he tells people now, when they ask, that his sister helped him see the real numbers, which is as close to thank you as I expect to get for a while, and which I have decided, for my own sake, to let be enough. My mother still introduces the new commissary arrangement to people when it comes up as Bo's decision, which it was, and I've stopped needing her to say my name in the same sentence for it to have counted. The message that told me all of it had mattered came 4 months later, from Milo. He'd gotten a part-time job bussing tables at a diner near his school and opened his very first savings account, and he wanted to know if Aunt Noelle would show him how to build one of those spreadsheets, because there was a class trip he wanted to go on, and he wanted to figure out the real number himself before he ever asked his parents for a dime of it. I read that text standing in my own kitchen and had to sit down on the floor for a minute, because that, more than anything else in this whole story, was the actual ending. Milo is going to grow up knowing that love and an honest number were never enemies. That you can look straight at a total and still be generous, still be kind, still be entirely someone's family. Bo and I talk most weeks now, mostly about ordinary things, a new menu item, Milo's grades, nothing that needs a spreadsheet. He still hasn't said the actual words thank you out loud, and I've made a kind of peace with the possibility that he never fully will. Not because he isn't grateful, I think he is, in his own slower way, but because saying it plainly would mean admitting how close he came to signing 5 years of his life away for a dream that had quietly stopped being entirely his own. I don't need the sentence. The chicken and dumplings selling out most Fridays at the commissary window is a kind of thank you I can actually taste. I keep Grandma June's spoon on my own counter now, in a little dish by the stove, not buried in the bottom of a bag anymore. I had a second one made for Milo last month, a plain wooden spoon with a small M burned into the base, and I gave it to him without a speech, because he's 12, and 12-year-olds see right through a speech. He just nodded, the way he does when he's filing something away for real this time, and put it in his own backpack. Here's what 9 years and $31,000 finally taught me, and I think it's worth passing on. Love that keeps no balance at all isn't love. It's just exposure, wearing a kinder word, and you can be someone who was genuinely, deeply needed by your family for a decade, and still decide on one ordinary Friday that being needed and being used had quietly become the same thing, and that you're allowed to want the difference back. That's my story. 3 phone calls, 11 minutes, 1 folder nobody in that kitchen wanted to see, and a wooden spoon that finally lives somewhere I can actually reach it. If you've ever been the family's safety net, the one who always somehow finds a way, take this as your sign that a person who can always show her work can also, finally, put the pen down. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.